What do a funeral bombing in Yemen in 2016 and the destruction of Gaza today have in common? In October 2016, Saudi warplanes dropped bombs on a funeral in Yemen. They killed 155 people. Hundreds more were maimed or burned. It was a double tap strike where the second missile hit rescuers trying to save the wounded. It became known as the Whitehall massacre, the biggest single loss of life during the war with the Houthis. Reports at the time spoke of the hall strewn with body parts and charred remains. Survivors had limbs torn off. The place has been turned into a lake of blood, one rescuer told reporters. International outrage followed. The US froze weapon sales to Saudi Arabia. But what about the UK? Because British bombs were used in that war, and Britain kept selling them. Middle East Eye spent 3 years trying to find out what happened in Whitehall after the Whitehall attack in Yemen, and if the attack had raised questions about whether the UK should continue licensing arms sales to Saudi. Along the way, Israel's offensive on Gaza and the continued licensing of UK arms exports to Israel month after month as the Palestinian death toll rises made finding an answer feel all the more urgent. The UK government frequently says it has one of the most robust arms export licensing regimes in the world, and that is true on paper. The policy is clear. The government will not allow arms exports when there is a clear risk they might be used in serious violation of international humanitarian law. So how was this allowed to happen, especially after the Whitehall attack? What we thought would be quite easy turned out to be a mammoth mystery to solve. First, we began by using the Freedom of Information Act, a tool anyone can use to ask for government records. It started with a hunch that buried somewhere in Whitehall, there had to be a paper trail if the attack had changed British arms export policy. But changing that trail meant entering a system that we now believe has been engineered to stall. From 2022 to 2024, we filed 15 FOI requests. Then came the delay. Some were rejected for being too broad, others too costly. One took 4.5 months to be denied, on the basis that it would have taken 3.5 days to fulfill. Meanwhile, key documents, such as a letter from Boris Johnson after the Whitehall massacre recommending the UK continue to sell bomb parts to Saudi Arabia, were repeatedly withheld. Departments bounced us around, repeatedly delaying their response, only to deny and cite national security or paperwork cost. But this investigation wasn't about chasing trivia. We were looking for decisions about whether the UK knew its weapons might be used to kill civilians in Yemen. And over, instead of answers, we got delay. And then came the denial of our requests and deflection. The war in Gaza changed things. Suddenly, infrastructure was being hit, and civilians in Gaza were being killed in Israeli airstrikes that might be using UK-made arms. Now, MPs wanted to know what the Foreign Office's assessment on UK arms sales was. The same question we'd been asking since the aftermath of the Whitehall attack. When the then Foreign Secretary David Cameron was pressed on whether he had been advised that Israel had breached international humanitarian law, he noted repeatedly that he wasn't a lawyer.
I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer.
Eventually saying,
The short answer to that is no.
But behind closed doors, it was a different story. Court documents showed how the British government had been worried about arms sales to Israel over its Gaza bombardment for months. Despite this, arms sales continued. Even after 3 British aid workers were killed by an Israeli airstrike, the government refused to say whether any arms exports to Israel had been suspended. Since 2016, arms campaigners and civil society groups have been warning that British arms were being used in Yemen by Saudi-led forces in attacks that harmed civilians. And when MPs were asked about Saudi Arabia's bombing of civilian targets in Yemen, same script, same silence. But in early 2024, as global outrage grew over Israel's war in Gaza, UK arms exports were in the spotlight again. Finally, in August 2024, we got something. A 10-page digest of heavily redacted emails sent between officials in the wake of the attack. One email noted that the latest assessment of Saudi Arabia's compliance was completed 1 week before the Great Wall attack, and that it should be included in an updated assessment. But what was the outcome of the updated assessment? We still don't know. What we do know, however, comes from whistleblower Mark Smith, who said in February this year that he watched the formulation of the UK arms export policy firsthand during the Yemen war and had resigned over it, adding that the government had ignored legal advice to stop selling arms to Saudi Arabia during the war in Yemen. So after 3 years and 15 FOIs, the public, including MPs, still do not know how and whether the Great Wall attack changed British arms exports to Saudi, a lack of transparency that makes it impossible to hold power to account.